How do ecstatic states fit into modern Western thought and life? What sense have we been able to make of them? I think and I hope this and the next few videos will show that the answers to these questions hold the potential to make a massive difference to human consciousness and human happiness. Anyway, welcome back to Platonic Soul. I hope you've been well. You may remember that in the last episode I talked about Freud's theories around what his friend Romain Rolland called the oceanic state, because I thought it made such a fascinating vignette or portrait of modernity's attempt to grapple with this type of phenomenon, the state of oneness with the world and with oneself. Today I'd like to backtrack a bit to start sketching out the history from a little further back, actually a fair bit further back. I think one of the most interesting things about modern history, actually, is how the post-Enlightenment West has responded to the ecstatic. The Enlightenment, or Age of Reason, with its inquiring spirit and its clear and distinct ideas, we talked about those last time with Descartes. It raised doubts about conventions and traditions of all kinds, including religious tradition. In the 18th century, of course, we have these philosophers like Voltaire, who leveled criticism of the church. And of course, it's conventional to talk about the Enlightenment as this period that spans basically the 17th and 18th centuries. But of course, in a sense, the Enlightenment never really ended because its spirit continues to shape our own time. Since the 19th century, for example, Darwin's theory of natural selection has made popular literal interpretations of the book of Genesis hard to hold, while Marx, of course, criticized religion as the opiate of the masses. So this inquiring or critical spirit continues into the next century. By the late 19th century, the widespread erosion of religious faith in the West was famously recognized by Nietzsche, of course. As Freud's friend noted, ecstatic or oceanic states have historically been associated with religion, with mysticism, and so it's natural to think that the Enlightenment spirit would also erode people's interest in these states. But in fact, what seems to have happened over the last 250 years or so, in the aftermath of the Enlightenment, is that Western curiosity about these states has not so much declined, but rather taken a different form. The conceptualization of these states in the terms of conventional Christianity has been supplemented and to some extent replaced by a secular understanding of them, of the notion, as we saw with Freud, of the oceanic feeling as a natural state, not a kind of supernatural visitation. Anyway, this process takes a form of a kind of rebellion against the Enlightenment notion that reality is primarily accessible to us through reason. We see this revolt start to grow in the last quarter of the 18th century with the Sturm und Drang movement in Germany, I think, and the birth of Romanticism. These movements are really focused on what you could call human subjectivity, what's going on inside the individual, human passions and intuitions, in a way that can come across as anti-rationalism. Hymns to the Night is a particularly interesting example of this. It's a set of poems by the German Romantic poet Novalis, published in 1800, and it begins by praising the light that reveals everything in its wondrous clarity, but then suddenly the poet announces, "Away I turn to the holy, the unspeakable, the secretive, night." His poem isn't always clear or transparent to the reader, but there's one thing that comes across with some level of insistence: this yearning to get through to a deeper reality than seems possible through abstract thought, or to get through to reality in a more immediate way than is possible through words. He speaks often, for example, somewhat paradoxically, of unspeakability. He wants to get at something unspeakable. There's opium and erotic frenzy in this opening passage. And again, as it did with Freud, and although we didn't mention it, Proust, the figure of the mother comes up here also. Anyway, he writes, "What wells up so menacingly under the heart and gulps down the soft air's sadness? Are you pleased with us, dark night? What are you holding under your cloak that grabs so unseen at my soul? Costly balm drips from your hand from a bundle of poppies. You raise up the soul's heavy wings. Darkly, unspeakably, we feel moved. I see a serious face, startled with joy, bends to me softly, reverently, and under the endlessly tangled locks of the mother's dear youth shows. How poor and childish the light seems now, how happy and blessed the day's departure. So now, since night turns your servants away from you, you'd sow gleaming spheres in the far spaces to show your own omnipotence. Your return in the times of your distance, more heavenly than those flashing stars the endless eyes seem which night opens up in us. They see farther than those palest of the countless hosts. Having no need for light, they see through the depths of a loving soul, which fills a higher space with unspeakable delight. Praise the world queen, the higher messenger of a holy word, a nurse of blessed love. She sends you, tender beloved, night's lovely sun. Now I wake, for I'm yours and mine. You called the night to life for me, humanized me. Consume my body with spirit fire so I can mix with you more intimately, airily. And the wedding night will last forever." So that's how his poem opens, quite dramatically, in an embrace of the night and rejection of the light. Excuse me. It's sort of similar with William Blake, for example, another romantic poet. It's really through imagination rather than reason that we can have some sort of access to the miraculousness of reality, that humans are able to enjoy a kind of boundlessness of life, but that abstract thinking with its mind-forged manacles, as Blake would put it, is really an impediment to this. So the focus of art and culture in the 19th century starts to shift away from abstractive thinking towards states in which there seems to be a more immediate perception of or reaction to the world, less mediated by thinking, at least in the Romantic movement anyway. At the same time, the late 18th, actually, and early 19th century, there's this new philosophical movement, German idealism, which seems to set as its goal the overcoming of the division between subject and object in this kind of mysterious absolute knowledge, it's called. Anyway, as secularism increasingly takes hold through the 19th century, this fascination with existential unity seems to take on a more concrete shape. There's a shift from a kind of interest in these unitive states to a desire to actually realize them in daily life. I'm thinking here mostly of New England transcendentalism, which drew inspiration from Romanticism, but other sources too. And whereas the Romantics were working within a Christian cultural context, even if, like Blake, they may have had their own rather eccentric interpretations of Christianity, in transcendentalism, there's an opening up to, among other sources, Hindu and other Asian teachings. The claim of exclusivity, which Christianity had once held on the West, is slipping here. To transcendentalists, there's a kind of indifference to theology, except insofar as it enables individuals to experience these ecstatic moments in which nature and spirit seem to be in harmony with one another in the here and now. Henry David Thoreau, in his 1854 book Walden, recognized this debt to the Bhagavad Gita and other Hindu texts. "The pure Walden water," he wrote, "is mingled with the sacred water of the Ganges." Anyway, these tendencies really come to a head, I think, in the work of Walt Whitman, his Song of Myself, which was first published in 1855, but he continued to revise over the next few decades, actually, until the early 1990s. It's really nothing other than an extended ecstatic vision, the whole thing, and it's quite a long poem. There's a sense here that the difference between self and other is in some way illusory. It's an idea expressed in a voice both jubilant, I think, and humble at the same time. That's how it strikes me. And it's announced at the very beginning of the work. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. For Whitman, receptivity, openness, rather than abstract thought, is what gives access to this ecstatic reality. He writes, he's a bit critical of abstract thinking. Backward I see in my own days, where I sweated through fog with linguists and contenders. I have no mockings or arguments. I witness and wait. His poem shows a yearning for unity with nature, with the other in the most immediate ways. I'll go to the bank by the wood and become undisguised and naked. I am mad for it to be in contact with me. The poet writes frankly of sexual desire for both women and men, which caused him to be accused of obscenity. One reviewer called Whitman's book a mass of stupid filth. And it seems Whitman was in some sense canceled as a result of it. He actually lost his job, at the Department of the Interior. One of the poem's most ecstatic passages follows a description of a sexual encounter. I mind how once we lay such a transparent summer morning, how you settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me and parted the shirt from my bosom bone and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart and reached till you felt my beard and reached till you held my feet. Swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and knowledge that pass all the argument of the earth. And I know that the hand of God is the promise of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own. And that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers. And that a kelson of the creation is love. And a kelson is this part of a ship, a wooden ship that stretched the whole length of the ship on the bottom and held it together, held the hull together. Of course, Whitman's mention of God shouldn't deceive us into thinking that he holds anything like conventional religious beliefs. He actually seems to be suggesting that all religion is in some way both transcended by and taken up by the individual in this ecstatic state. He writes, I do not despise you priests all time the world over. My faith is the greatest of faiths and the least of faiths. In closing, worship ancient and modern, and all between ancient and modern. Believing I shall come again upon the earth after 5,000 years, waiting responses from oracles, honoring the gods, saluting the sun, making a fetish of the first rock or stump, powwowing with sticks in the circle of obis, helping the lama or Brahmin as he trims the lamps of the idols. Dancing yet through the streets in a phallic procession, wrapped and austere in the woods, a gymnosophist, drinking mead from the skull cup to Shastas and Vedas, admirant, minding the Koran, walking the Teocallis, that's the pyramid temples that you find in Mexico and Central America, spotted with gore from the stone and knife, beating the serpent skin drum, accepting the Gospels, accepting him that was crucified, knowing assuredly that he's divine, to the Mass kneeling or the Puritan's prayer rising or sitting patiently in a pew, ranting and frothing in my insane crisis or waiting dead-like till my spirit arouses me. looking forth on pavement and land, or outside of pavement and land, belonging to the winders of the circuit of circuits. Despite the religious heavy language, I think this really kind of points to a fully secularized conception of existential ecstasy, because once you say that it's something that spans all religious experience, and it starts to look an awful lot like a natural phenomenon, something that humans experience more or less just by virtue of being human. By the way, you may remember me registering some interest in my last video, and the fact that Westerners in Freud's time were already practicing yoga has led me to look a little bit deeper into the adoption of yoga in the West. And it seems that yoga, at least the theory of it, this idea that we can be freed from self-division by cultivating a state of pure awareness, reached the West as early as the 1850s. Thoreau, for example, refers to himself as a yogi. And then a huge step in its reception into the Western world came when Bengali spiritual teacher Swami Vivekananda toured Europe and North America, and that was in the 1890s. So just as Whitman was polishing off the last revisions of his poem, and so he taught the physical practice of yoga as well as the theory. So all this might sound pretty remote from the realm of science, and indeed ecstasy or existential unity, insofar as it's been talked about outside conventional religion, has so far been pretty much the preserve of artists and essayists in the period we've been looking at. Poets. Science has been busying itself with more hard-headed pursuits. But this is all about to change with William James, the American philosopher and psychologist. And we'll look at him in the next episode. Thanks very much, and hope to see you next time.